Okay, everyone, so we'll finish this second part of the video up. So a few things. We've been talking about the economy during the war and the centralization of it. We can also look at some of the other big effects in the economy. One group that definitely sees an impact is women, and the extent of this can probably be debated. Of course, there were a lot of women working before World War I, but we do see a shift of some women who had not traditionally been working before World War I, working during World War I because men are involved in the war effort in large number, and there is this huge industrial production that is geared toward the war effort. And so we get lots of women working in what is like non-traditional jobs for women at the time, including working in a munitions factory. We also are seeing for the first time women involved in the war effort. Women could actually join not the Marines, but other areas of the military. And even if they weren't involved in combat, that wasn't allowed at this time, they do perform a variety of roles. And so women in the military, and we also see, of course, this push toward suffrage. So a lot of movement throughout the World War I time period to push Congress and President Wilson to support the 19th Amendment. And some of these capabilities that women are demonstrating, is likely adding to some of the arguments about the right to vote. There are also a lot of significant changes related to African Americans. One of the things that we start to see is a push and a pull and a very large scale migration from the southern part of the United States to the northern states, including New Jersey. So this is where we see some cities like Newark or like Trenton start to host large populations of Black Americans. And there had been in some communities of Black Americans, but the numbers will swell because there's a lot of industrial jobs, and a lot of the industrial jobs in the north in places like Chicago or New York City or whatnot become of interest, and large numbers of Black Americans are going to see some of those jobs kind of come their way. So there are a great deal of changes. Some of the things that we also see is African Americans in the military. This will become something where there is a large amount of segregation and ultimately a lot of changes in the experiences of African American soldiers because there's a great deal of respect in some cases for some African American soldiers who fight under France, which is really a small number of African American soldiers, but it becomes important. And there's also a large number of African Americans who see the war and its ideals of fighting for democracy. And this becomes a theme and maybe a renewed civil rights effort upon the end of the war. And we'll see 1919 actually to be a time of a great number of race riots. And a lot of that is because of expectations and demands for greater freedoms and resistance from white supremacists. In any case, we also see lots and lots of results from the way in which the economy is going down. We do have this idea of a centralized economy, the government coordinating some of that effort. It's working in some areas, it doesn't work in others, so there's some mismanagement, but there are a great deal of government regulations over the economy. This makes some people, socialists and progressives, very happy. They've been seeking to do this. Some people will find this very problematic, but this explosion of labor is something that's noteworthy. There actually are some strides made for laborers at this time. Not only are there higher wages and more opportunities, but some better rights in terms of expectations for 8-hour day and, higher wages and things like that. There's also promises from unions that there won't be strikes. So it's kind of some compromises that happen regarding labor. Another big theme, and this is also kind of a government-led focus, is a great deal of propaganda. Wilson does not want to tolerate any dissent. He takes the entire war effort under his wing and looks at it like anything that jeopardizes a successful U.S. war effort is problematic. So despite the fact that this is a war to protect democracy, as Wilson puts it. And there's, kind of this objective of these broader peace goals so that, war will never be fought again. At home, democracy is decreasing, and there is a great deal of discussion about anyone who's talking either against the draft or against the war. And George Creel, who is a journalist and thinks very highly of Wilson, is appointed to run what's called the Committee on Public Information, and it becomes, staffed with more than 100,000 Americans, and it is really all about how to support the war. And it is, driven into Americans' heads in a variety of ways, in all kinds of formats, and it is enforced. So it becomes very significant. There's also going to be a squelching of dissent, largely through two acts, one known as the Espionage Act, which really makes it a crime, basically, to speak out against the draft or to somehow obstruct the war effort. So somebody who is, consciously describing that the draft is problematic, calling out people to not participate in the draft. Socialists, who largely were doing this because they were anti-war, become very victimized by the Espionage Acts. The Sedition Act of 1918 strengthens the Espionage Act, and the wording is very broad, but it makes it almost impossible to speak out against the U.S. government, against the war, and it is so broad that lots of people get caught. This becomes a way for the government to squelch all sorts of dissent, including socialists, the IWW, and we see a rise of a whole bunch of vigilante groups, people in their own communities who start policing each other, pointing fingers at people who are speaking out, teachers that are too loud, a whole bunch of finger pointing going on, and more people under arrest. A great deal of pressure and censorship is happening because of the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act. One of the things that you have for homework this week is to look at a court case known as the Schenck case. There's another case known as the Abrams case. These two court cases, essentially the Supreme Court gives a thumbs up during wartime for there to be a suppression of freedom of speech. And the majority in the Schenck case is led by a Supreme Court justice known as Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he creates a test suggesting that, just like yelling fire in a very crowded movie theater could have, consequences, having something during a wartime that, creates some sort of wrench in the effort of the war is like, yelling fire in a theater, and it becomes a clear and present danger. And so the Schenck versus U.S. case sets up kind of a precedent that the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act will be maintained, and large numbers of Americans, thousands of Americans, are actually held under arrest. One of these will be Eugene Debs, is actually jailed for some years before he's eventually pardoned by a later president. And Bill Big Haywood, who was the leader of the IWW, flees to the Soviet Union in an effort to get away from some of this oppression. Some socialists are deported during this time. A great deal of civil liberty abuses. Another group that sees like its heyday, it's a group we talked about when we were looking at immigration, is the American Protective League. This is a group that is very much, seeking loyalty of Americans, and it becomes one of these vigilante groups where people are kind of taking an oath to ensure and protect each other. There's also a lot of impacts on the German-American community. In particular, things that are German are seen as terrorizing, and lots of German Americans change their name. Some people are photographed, some people are have to take a loyalty oath, and there's actually incarceration camps that are created for German Americans who are perceived not to be loyal. And there is a great deal of word changing. So, music that was German classical music isn't going to be played anymore. German's not going to be taught in schools anymore. So kind of a lot of wholesale, elimination of German culture from the United States, efforts to change, sauerkraut to Liberty cabbage and the hamburger to the Liberty burger or whatever it was called, those types of things, and a large number of effects on German Americans, including some efforts of violence. And a few things that I think we can note that we'll do as the week and tomorrow and Thursday come on is we'll look at Wilson's 14 points and the Treaty of Versailles. So I'll end it here, and we'll see you in class on Thursday. Check out that Brinkley text and some of the Schenck homework, and take it easy.